Hey everyone, Liam here. So today's video we're going to be going over how I painted Hive Fleet Titus, which is my custom Hive Fleet for my own Tyranid army, which I'm doing as part of a crusade force with a group of gaming buddies. Now, today's video we're going to be going over how I painted the skin and how I painted the brown bone on different parts of the model, and I'm going to break it down so you can see how I got the textured result on it. So if the video is helpful, if you do like it, please feel free to hit that subscribe button and I'll have more videos coming. So we are airbrushing on this video because it is an army piece. So the model is base coloured with Vallejo Game Air Whole Red. It's quite a nice browny red. And then what I'm doing is Vallejo Game Air Light Brown has been added to the paint mix. So the idea of this is just to brighten it. So you're getting a mix of the whole red and the light brown. So it gives you a bit of a go-between. You can also see my paint is quite thin. So I might do an airbrushing video on the basics on how I thin my paint, but in this case I have equal parts of Vallejo Flow Improver, equal parts water to the amount of paint. So if I've got 3 drops of paint, I'll have a combination of 3 drops of Flow Improver and water. So there'll be 1.5 drops of water, 1.5 drops of Flow Improver. But the idea is I want the paint nice and thin. So all I'm going to do is consistently tint what I already have underneath, and the angle of my airbrush is really important. So in this case, I'm almost trying to catch edges with the skin, with the arms. So I'm almost holding my airbrush parallel to the part that I'm airbrushing. So for example, the arm. Now, it's worth noting this is a gaming piece, so I'm not painting underneath the bodies at all. Even when I did the Broodlord, the underneath of that is not painted. It's just the base coat of whole red, because I'm not overly fussed about what people see underneath. If it was a competition piece or a client's model, then it would be a whole different ball game. But you can see I'm just building up that paint, just building up that layer, and I'm doing it really slowly. The minute you see your paint look wet on that model or shiny, you need to stop airbrushing, because the minute that paint looks wet, you're going to end up pushing that paint around and you're going to get loads of puddles and patches. So our next stage, we're going to jump straight to that light brown, the Vallejo Game Colour light brown, and as you can see on screen, it's the same sort of mix, and we're going to pick out even brighter points. So a lot of people do this with a zenithal highlight. I mean, that is generally quite a good idea. It's not something that I'm normally a fan of, but it works sometimes. So in this case, what I've chosen to do with this is the shoulder pads on the Genestealers, or the Genestealers in this case, and then towards the lower wrists and the hands, those are going to be brighter than the center of the arms. And the reason why I've done that is because it just breaks up the shape of the body, because the biggest issue with this is unless you're brush painting it, it's very hard on such a small model for the airbrush to pick out those organic surfaces and organic shapes of the muscles and that sort of stuff. So what ends up happening is you end up with a very flat result, and I didn't want that. So for me, I've chosen to brighten up the shoulders towards the center, and you'll see, like on the Broodlord, which I'll show on screen now, it's brighter around the head, the carapace and the shoulders, and it's a lot darker towards the legs and the middle of the arms, and that helps with the models. So you can see on screen there's really not much going on. There's really not much different going on to the previous video, previous clip. So the only other suggestion that I'd say with airbrushing in general is never start spraying on the model. Your first initial spray normally comes with some splatter, so you don't want that. So start off the model, and when you finish your brush stroke, so your spray, finish that off the model as well. And the point being is, what happens is that will hopefully avoid as much splatter as possible. So when I started out, what I initially started doing was, where I was holding the model with my left hand and the airbrush in my right, I would start airbrushing on my hand itself, my glove, and I still do it sometimes. And then once I get my trigger control the way I like it, then I'll go over the model and finish off the model. So it's like one sweeping stroke. Right, so next up, we are just going to go back and redefine the darkness basically. So we're going back to that original whole red, and you can see on screen that this is really quite thin. I've got a little bit more water than normal, probably an extra drop of water in comparison to what I had last time. But the idea here is you want to be able to put on really thin layers. You can see on screen that I'm playing with the kitchen roll there. So all we're going to do is any of it that looks a bit too bright, maybe a bit too white, then just go over it very gently and it will tint it. But more importantly, what I'm doing is with those center of the arms around the elbows, I'm going to redefine those. So I'm actually just going to spray around those elbows with the whole red. And the point of that is just, again, it just gives some kind of interest because I don't want it to be flat. So we are on to a brushwork now. Now the previous airbrushing parts were not entirely necessary. The point of them was just to make it a little bit easier to give me a softed transition in the background. But I'm going to kind of get rid of all that now. So if you don't have an airbrush or you're not confident with the airbrush, you can still do this. So what we're doing at the moment is I've got the Vallejo Game Color Light Brown on my brush. I'm going to apologise for the video on this one because for some reason I struggle to keep it on camera for just this colour, but the rest of the video you won't have an issue seeing it. But we're with the Vallejo Game Color Light Brown. Now with thinning this, I've added a small amount of water, but not a huge amount. The thing is with this is we want a nice strong mark. If you thin the paint too much, it's going to be too translucent and you're just going to end up getting like a really soft transition, a soft blend, and you don't want that. You want really hard marks. And what we're doing is we're painting lines. Everything is a line here. So no wide marks, no soft transitions. We're picking out the parts which we want to have texture. So in this case, I'm going over everything and I'm painting lines running along the arm. So, and what I'm thinking about when I'm doing it is I'm thinking about muscle direction, and I'll put a picture of what I mean on screen. But the idea is, in my head, I'm seeing the muscle strands along his arms, and I'm painting the lines to follow those muscle strands. And obviously, it's an alien, so we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. So you have to interpret it to a certain extent. But that's what I'm going with. I'm also at the edges of his skin. He then has like a ridge and then some bone at the elbow. I am highlighting those edges like an edge highlight because I want to frame that section of the arm before it goes into, say, the brown bone or any separate part. Because remember, especially small scale, you really need to frame your miniatures. You need to frame everything so it's easily readable. So make sure you do that because it's important. But yeah, so nice thin lines. The thinner you get the lines, the nicer the result will be. Having said that, with the Genestealer, I haven't been as careful with the lines as I was on the Broodlord, just because I got a lot of Tyranids to paint. So this is very much smaller scale and it's faster for obvious reasons. But you can see on screen where we're going with it. It's looking quite good, but it's still very flat because we're just using that light brown. It's the first colour, and then we're going to work on highlights next. And you see the hands as well. All I'm doing with the hands is the finger sections. So my brush stroke is starting from the knuckle and I'm moving away towards the end of the finger where the claw is. And the reason for that is where you remove your brush is going to be where you have the brightest paint or the most paint left over. So by starting our brush stroke up here and then moving away, what we're going to end up having is towards the end of the finger you will have a stronger mark, and that just gives you a bit of a softer transition. But again, we're still doing lines, and I'm doing the same with the hand. So I'm starting up here and then I'm ending on the knuckles when I do that, when I do those lines, because it makes the knuckle will be brighter than everywhere else. And I am also thinking about that with the rest of the body as well. So I'm only doing the arm on camera because it's a good representation of the technique, and it means the video is not going to be ridiculously long. But think about the direction of your brushstroke, because the direction of your brushstroke will give you the physical mark you want. Remember, this is a textured result. We do not want a smooth result. Right, so next up we are doing a mix of Vallejo game model colour, Vallejo model colour ivory and that Vallejo game colour light brown. Now, I should have said previously, really important point with this, we're obviously painting lines, like I said. Every time we paint here, we're going to be painting lines. It's really important, but it's also important not to cover everything. So every time you paint these lines, regardless whatever stage you're at, you always want to be leaving some of the previous colour showing through. So if you paint a line, say along here, then your other line, you need a gap between. So you've got light, dark, light, dark. You don't want a pattern, and it's fine if some of the lines overlap, but you don't want to cover everything with a colour, because then you're just losing the effect of this textured, almost corded, like a wood effect on the skin. And that's the most important bit about this. This is why the Broodlord that I showed you at the beginning actually looks really nice. It's because the texture, the paintwork itself is not actually very advanced. It's not a really crazy advanced technique. It's the texture in the armour and the skin that make this an interesting model. So remember, lines and leave gaps, let your previous colours show through. And when you're going brighter, so in this case the bone white, the ivory and the light brown mix, I'm not going over everything. So previously with the light brown I went over the whole arm. Now what I'm doing with this mix is closer towards the elbow, I'm no longer covering at all. I'm only working further towards the top of the arm and further towards the bottom, because I'm going to have the elbow area darker, just so it makes things more interesting. And that's how we get our illusion of light, and that's how we make little bits pop. So the other thing is, I know I say this on every video, but you really want a nice point to your brush. I'm not normally one to say that you need to spend money on lots of equipment, because I don't believe in that, but good brushes are really important, and you need a nice pointed tip on your brush for this. So remember what we do, get your paint on your brush, not too much, make sure it's thin enough so it doesn't like tug, it doesn't leave inconsistent marks, but it still needs to be thick enough, it still needs to be opaque enough to leave a strong mark. You don't want a really soft translucent mark. Paint in this way, and then either get your kitchen roll or your finger and pull that brush towards you and twist it as you go. And then what that'll do is it will give you a nice tip, and then just test your brush stroke on your finger first. So just put a little paint on your finger or your kitchen roll just to see whether that's going to leave a nice clean sharp mark, because if you make a mistake off the model, it's really not a big deal, but if you make a mistake on the model, it's a pain in the backside having to paint over it and correct it. So remember, always test off the model. Just do a quick brush mark to test. Alright, so our next stage for this is quite an enjoyable one. I'm getting some of the GW washes. Now, I don't use these a huge amount, truth be told, but they're very handy when it comes to army painting. So on screen I have Seraphim Sepia, Agrax Earthshade and Drakenhoof Nightshade. For all intents and purposes, one is a blue, one's a brown, and one's a bit of a orange brown. So the whole point of this is I'm going to slap it on the model and I'm going to give it some colour. Now it's worth noting my Drakenhoof Nightshade, my blue, has got a bit of water in it because I don't have any more, so I wouldn't actually recommend watering them down personally. But you can see on screen what I'm doing is in areas with the blue especially and the brown that I want darker, I slap a bit of the wash on in a big puddle. And what's this going to do is it's going to tint what we already have, so it will give this very desaturated brown skin that we have some colour. It just adds a little bit of interest. But the thing is, when you slap on a big puddle, what happens is it looks horrible and it has coffee stains around where it dries. So the key here is you slap the blue on, or you slap whatever colour it is, put a big puddle, and then you go back with a clean brush and just poke the brush into the puddle of wash. That will absorb all the extra that you don't need. And then what with that same clean brush as well is if you just feather out the edge of where the wash sits, so get a little bit of water on that brush, and then it's almost like just adding water to it and pulling that wash around, because what that will do is it'll make the edge of that wash disappear, so you won't get that hard line, that coffee stain that gets created. And all this is going to do is it's going to tint the skin. Now there are more effective ways of doing this. You can see on screen quickly that I've just done it with the blue. I put a blob of blue on and then I just messed it up and feathered out the edge, and that works. But there are more effective ways of doing this, but this is the fast way of doing it, and this is an army piece. Right, so we're going to paint the claws next. So the claws are black because we're going to be using the same colours, but the point here is that we are going to use a darker end of the spectrum of these colours. So it's the same colours as claws, but we're going to use the darker end. So the claws are black, so I'm using that Vallejo game colour whole red, and then I'm painting these claws, but I'm leaving the black in the recesses. So where the claws are touching, where the claws meet the skin on the fingers, that is black, and it's probably a third of the claw I'm leaving black. So that's going to be our darker end of it, and then this whole red is still incredibly dark, but we're painting on those claws. And it's really important, again, direction of our brush stroke, because this whole model is all about lines. Everywhere there is lines, and anything that doesn't have lines will look a bit, not necessarily off, but it will draw the eye, and you'll see that later when I paint the head in a later video. But the direction of your brush stroke is we want to end where we want it brightest, so the tip of the claw. So you're going to start your brush stroke towards the finger, and then you're going to pull away towards the end of the claw. Now, it's also worth noting the paint is quite thin because I want this, I don't really want a hard line with the whole red just yet, but it's not a big deal if you do. But we're still painting the lines because I quite like the idea of this streaky marked claw, and you can see on screen. So this is the whole red, this is where we're going with it. And all this does at this stage is it almost just tints that black to give us that really nice dark browny red. So we're building up on this as well. So all we're going to do is, with the whole red, we're going to keep adding a small amount of Vallejo game colour light brown. And we're going to add consecutive amounts. So this is, say, 2 parts whole red to 1 part light brown, and then we're going to go up to 1 part whole red, 1 part light brown, and then go up to light brown. So you can do as many increments as you want. The more increments of colour mixes you have, the softer this transitions are going to be. For me personally, I've jumped straight to light brown because, again, it's an army piece. I've got so many Tyranids to paint for my Crusade force, and the thought of spending hours on hours doing them is it's not going to happen. So same brush stroke again. The difference is we're just doing smaller lengths of the claw. So you have black, whole red, and then light brown. And the difference here is, the reason why this looks different to the skin, even though we're using the same colours, is there's no ivory in it, and there's no black in the skin. We don't see the black, so we're using the darker end of the spectrum of these colours, and it kind of ties it together. I quite like muted colour palettes, so I quite like using the same colours in the same models. But yeah, you can see the claws on screen. So this is the finished Genestealer alongside the finished Broodlord. There is a difference in quality here, and I really want to point that out. Broodlord, I spent a lot more time on the amount of colours I put into the skin, so there are more mixes of that, the colours between the whole red, the light brown, the ivory. I also put a little bit of white in the Broodlord. So the reason why I want to point that out is because the Broodlord is obviously a character model in the army. It's also substantially larger. It's 3 times the size of a Genestealer. So it's it's a good way of showing that the characters are obviously more important, and it's nicer to spend more time on it. But for the purposes of the video, I think it's much better to be showing a army, a troop choice, a small model, because it's easier to do it on a larger model because you have more space. And if you can do it on something like a Genestealer or Hormigan or something of that scale, then you can definitely do it on something larger. If you guys want to see me do larger models for this Tyranid scheme, then let me know. And I mean, I've got X-Creens here, I've got Zone Thropes here to get done. So there are definitely other videos that I can do if this is helpful. So let me know in the comments if you want to see more Tyranid stuff. This isn't the sort of thing that I was normally going to do on the channel, but have, as I said, had a lot of requests after posting up the Broodlord. So give me some feedback, let me know. Hit the subscribe button if you liked it. If you want to support the channel, by all means, I've got a Patreon, but mainly the Patreon's used for tuition. So I do online tuition and I paint full-time for commissions. So that's how I get my income. That's why the channel's free, and that's why I'm committed to keeping the channel free. So if you want to support me at all, pay me to paint something or get some tuition from me, either online or when all this is over, we can do in-person tuition as well. So get in touch, let me know, and I hope it was helpful. Cheers.